so here are parts of the floats. That's the main part that's going to be swirled around. Those are parts that fit on the front and give it a circle. Then there's other pieces for the front and the back, starting to put on the front. And then that piece is something I made up myself, because the first thing you got to do is roll this kind of rectangular parallelogram piece around and glue it together, edge glue it. And I couldn't do that. So, oh yeah, everything, the edges, of course, are colored with a marker. So what I did was take a piece of extra, a little strip that was wooden colored, someplace on the model, and on the plans. There's on the parts. There's some places where there's like large fields of colored paper on a couple places, and I cut off a little piece that's wooden in shade, so it hides pretty well. And I just put this on, glue this to one end, so that I make tab essentially. A tab that's going to fit around, which is typical of what you do anyway. And that way, you've got a place to actually, as you roll it around, a place to glue it. So that isn't in the kit, but I could not, for the life of me, I mean, I built the other side first off camera to see how it works, and then I'm trying to film this one. But I couldn't figure out how to pull it around so that it looked good. Made sure holes got poked. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There on the top essentially, and then there's one that's going to be on the edge that's going to on a strut that goes out to the underneath. And then there's one little, well actually there's two. There's a little former in the front and there's a little former that forms the back. And the shape is interesting. It's like a squashed ice cream cone or something. It's an interesting shape. The tail end is kind of flat, and then the front is the shape of that oval component. Anyway, just like everything else, when you're trying to make something curl, you curl it first and get it to spin and roll around tighter than you need to be, so that you can actually put it together and glue it. And then once it's glued, you can shape it into the right shape you want, or add formers or whatever. At least this is how I do it. So I did this, and I rolled it on itself like a little Tootsie Roll. Anything to make it so that the thing will actually roll over, and you can actually glue it, which is kind of the point. Then add a little bit of glue, as you see there. Using a piece of wire or something, or a brush is probably the best way to do this. And then you slide these together and crimp them with a pair of tweezers, a pair of forceps. And it takes a little bit of patience and care to do that, just because they don't always come together perfectly. You can see that it is curled over, but it isn't completely curled. I probably should have done it a few more times. But I take my tweezers and I sort of get them on that step, on that ledge with the glue and the extra flap that I made, which doesn't, by the way, interfere with the rest of the building, which is good. And then I start squeezing and putting that line together, as you can see. And that's just like any other putting together fuselage parts or whatever. Very similar to what you do in a lot of parts of paper modeling. Just being careful, like that, or it didn't even glue. But pressure and a little bit of time usually works. And I got that all squinched together, and there's the initial beginning part. Now, to make sure it's really glued, I like to put something round in there so I can push against it, and sort of that way I'm hitting the little strip and all the glue on the inside, and you give that a few minutes, and that's going to be very dry and very workable. Work really well. And if it splits a little, it's okay, because you've got that wood piece underneath. Now I'm just making sure these pieces are open. Like that's the side piece that's going to go a strut, which you'll see later. But this little guy, the front former, goes right in there, and you want to make it so that it's horizontal with that little side hole, because that sort of orients it as being sort of the right shape. If that isn't oriented with that little former that's sort of lined up in the middle with that hole, then you're going to have an oblong shape. It's not, you want it to be horizontal, and you want all those holes on the top to be on the top. You don't want them to be on the side or kittywampus somewhere. So take some time to make sure you get that located. When you do, you can glue it in. Traditionally, what I tended to do was threw in some super glue on the other side. Once I got it there, I just tacked it in place. Has to be strong. because it's going to be something that's going to have some pieces of wire glued up next to it. Um, but there you go. Oh, and that is a little tiny piece that I forgot about it. That's the part that's going to form the back end. You can see the shape of the little float. It's that racetrack shape in the front, and then the back is going to be flattened like that into this little shape. And you wouldn't think it would work very well. It'd be hard to fit in, but it's actually really easy. What I do is take a little white glue, put it around the inside where that former is going to attach, and then I take my piece on some forceps and I put it in on the edge. So I grab it and then I butt it up flush into the corner where I know it's supposed to be. That would basically get it where it's going to be horizontal, and you're going to have everything pushed up there. And then you just kind of slowly push it down and squeeze around it until it goes down flush and wraps around that little former. And again, the model is such that these laser cut parts are really sweet. If you cut them out of balsa or cardboard yourself, they would work too. But now these pieces, oh, this piece is kind of, this really skinny piece has to be rolled so that it's like a half circle. And because it's the back end of the float, it basically falls at the very end of the float to give the back end. It's not supposed to be flat; it's supposed to be kind of rolled over. So you roll it over just like anything else. I start with this very fine piece of wire and roll it against something soft underneath it, like my finger, and keep playing with it until, I hope you can see it, you get a little curve in it. So it looks like a C or a cut-up tube. And then you just glue it on. And the ends, it doesn't fit all the way to the ends. It's a little shy of the ends, and you make sure it's even, so you got the even amount either side. Those ends will be plugged up by these very tiny, tiny, weeny, teeny pieces of right there and on the other side. They're going to be covered by these little fish-shaped tiny pieces, which are, those are the ones that are cut up right here. Those, and they look really small and impossible, but they're not. Two per side, rolls over, and it closes the ends very easily. Now, start the front of the float. And so this is the front middle part, and so I roll it around because it's basically the cross section is, I think, a semicircle or close to it. And all I do is get that so that I can put it on like that. So I just put some glue on the ends and then put it so that it's flush, and the edges of it basically match up with the seams that are on the float on the top and bottom. So that starts the shape of the front of your float. There, as you can see, it's a ring piece like that, but you can see if that was covered in, that's all going to be the shape of the float. And so now the rest of it is just to fill in those open pieces, and that's done with two of these little fish-shaped things on each side. So to make these, you get them rolled so that they start to form the shape, this crescent shape, the crescent shaping into a crescent, and then you put some glue on the side and you glue them in, edge glue them. And I started right up at that piece like so, and then the second one fits in behind it and goes up, butts up against the former area at the base. And I have to admit, the one that I built beforehand to test this out went absolutely swimmingly. I mean, it looks beautiful. It's smooth. There's no ridges. Everything lined up really well. Then the one that I put on, of course, for you guys to see on video, did not go nearly as well. I mean, at the end, it's okay. It's going to be fine. But I had a bear of a time getting this stuff even on this one. The point is, looking at this, you get the idea. All I can tell you is my other side looked much better. And I'll show you at the end. You'll see the other side actually looks considerably better than this one. But, as I'm fond of saying, good enough for the girls we date. Anyway, put that piece in, and then put some glue on the base and on the connection on the first part, which is going to connect to the other little fish-shaped crescent, and slide it in place. And you can fudge a little bit. You can do a little squeezing and a little tucking here and there, and it'll overall give the right impression. But when you look at this side, you're going to see that there's sort of steps in it, and there shouldn't be steps. It should be real smooth. You may see the seams, which is okay, I think. But the steps shouldn't be there, and that's because things went wonky. And it's hard to do this on camera. It's hard to make it because you're not looking at it exactly the same way, and you're worried about keeping your hands in the camera, all kinds of nonsense. So what you do is do it off camera, and very carefully get it lined up, and you'll end up with a really nice float. The back end is fine, the main part, but this front end on this float, I would say not my best work, but that's okay. So you basically glue in those last pieces, make sure they are tight. And if you have any pieces that don't quite glue, you sort of play with them a little more. And there's those two holes, which are going to glow underneath the wing. And here is the other side finished. And I've already put the struts on it and rigged it. But you can see the front is actually considerably smoother and nicer, went together better. But that's what you're shooting for at the end. And getting that float on with the angle isn't hard. I sort of did it by the Mark I eyeball, and that was more than sufficient. And those are just wires they give you the shapes of the wires and on the kit. And so you just basically cut them to shape, and you'll have a good spot. I'm dubious about where that long wire goes, but we'll talk about that later. Looks neat.